But the idea is just basically to have a table of different representatives from different organisations that in their own way try to exert positive change. Just to go through the speakers with you in the order in which they appear. So we have Lara Speicher, who's head of publishing at UCL Press, and she'll be sort of talking about publishing open access. We have Victoria Moody, who is a research lead at JISC, and she will speak about the tools and services that JISC provide, as well as other things as well. We also have Ben Bleasdale, who's a senior policy and advisor at the Wellcome Trust, and of course, hopefully you're all aware of the hashtag Reimagine Research, so please do follow that on Twitter. We also have James Parry, the Chief Executive of UKRIO, and he'll talk about how the UKRIO has dealt with and is dealing with research integrity, ethics and other things to do with research quality questions. We also have Sam Parsons and James Bartlett. I want to make it clear to everybody, Sam is on the left of your screen. He's represented reproducibility, but not to forget that he's also advocacy of teaching and is one of the key people in the FORRT initiative. And he will be joined by a fellow co-founder of ReproducibiliTea, Sophia Crüwell, as well. So I will now hand, whoopsie daisy, that was a bit premature. I will now hand over to Lara Speicher. So Lara, if you just want to get yourself keyed up and ready. I don't think you have any slides, you're just delivering a straight talk, is that correct?
That's correct, hello.
Okay, so I'll hand the keys.
Hello?
Yep, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really pleased to be here and I hope you've had a good conference so far. Thank you for the introduction. As Sam said, I'm the head of publishing for UCL Press, which is the university publisher for University College London. I'm going to be talking about our open access model today, our activity, our achievements over the last few years since launching, and the benefits of the open access model of monograph publishing in particular for impact and visibility. So going back to the start, UCL Press launched in 2015, so it's a relatively new press. When it launched, it was the first fully open access university press to launch in the UK. A few others have launched with a similar model since then, but on the whole, most of the established UK university presses operate a model in which they cover their costs via print sales, and they make a certain number of their books open access when funding is available to do so. A bit later on, I'll be talking about our business model and describing how that enables us to make everything we publish fully open access at the point of publication. So all the books we publish are made available in a free to download PDF. And in addition, we sell print versions for those who still want that option. And it is the case that sales do continue to be in demand even when the open access is available. The open access versions are available to download from our website. They are in our institutional repository. And we also disseminate them widely around the world on a range of platforms, including some that you will all be familiar with, such as JSTOR and Google Books. Since we launched, so it's about 5 years ago now, we've published over 150 monographs and we have a portfolio of 14 journals. We've been building that up steadily over those years since originally launching, and we now publish around 40 books a year. We publish both UCL and non-UCL authors, and that's similar to most university presses who publish academics from their own institution and beyond. And we publish mainly in the humanities and social sciences. Not exclusively, but those are the predominant areas for monograph publishing. We have developed particular strengths in anthropology, archaeology, architecture and built environment, education and sustainability, although we are open to publishing all subjects that are taught at UCL. The specialisms that have emerged reflect particularly strong disciplines at UCL. So, for example, the Institute of Education and the Bartlett School of Architecture rank #1 in the world. So they're very research intensive faculties and institutes, and therefore they have a lot of publishing outputs. In terms of how we operate, so even though we're an open access press completely, which is quite radical, in other ways we operate as a normal traditional scholarly press in terms of our processes. So we have an editorial board that oversees proposals and peer review for all our books. So everything is peer reviewed. We undertake full copy editing, typesetting, marketing and dissemination for our books. So apart from the open access, we are pretty much the same as other presses. And this is something that's really important to authors when choosing where to publish, especially when there can be still some anxiety in some areas about publishing open access, knowing for an author, knowing that they're going to have a similar experience to any other publisher that they would otherwise work with is really reassuring for them. So now I'll come on to talk about the impact that can be achieved via open access publishing. So we get reports on a monthly basis from all the platforms that we disseminate with, which I mentioned earlier. And we recently reached the milestone of our books and journals being downloaded over 3 million times in over 220 countries and territories around the world. And if you want to have a look at those statistics separately, you can go onto our website and there's a dashboard, an interactive dashboard, where you can look up any of the books we've published, and you can click on a map and see where they've been downloaded and how many times. When we consider that the average monograph sells around 200 copies in print form around the world in its lifetime, often at a very high retail price and mainly to institutional libraries, we can see that in comparison, making books available open access is opening them up to an audience size and global spread that was previously not really considered possible, and that usage of the book increases exponentially. The downloads for the individual books varies quite significantly though. So for example, our most downloaded book is a book on global social media usage, and it's called How the World Changed Social Media, and that's been downloaded nearly 500,000 times. Some of our more niche titles, on the other hand, have been downloaded 5,000 or 6,000 times over a few years. But even that lower figure is still a significant increase on the typical print sales that I mentioned before of around 200 copies. The variation in download figure can usually be attributed to one of a number of different factors. So it could be how topical the book is, or the author's profile, their support in promoting the book, whether it gets widely reviewed, whether it ties in with a particular conference or other event, for example. So we monitor all those things quite carefully and analyse the effects of different these different features on how a book is received. For the authors that we publish, open access is really important, and many choose UCL Press specifically for this reason. They often state that they want to ensure that their research reaches the widest audience possible, and often they want to ensure that the subjects of their research can read it, as is often the case with anthropology and area studies, for example. Other authors are particularly keen to reach policymakers. I'm going to move on to describe our business model very briefly, because scholarly publishing, it does cost money to do it well. And although we do sell print books, these are priced to recover the print cost and the cost of sales. So the majority of our operating costs are subsidised by UCL. However, the costs for running the press represent a fraction of UCL's total research budget, so UCL Press's activity is seen as a really worthwhile cost, considering the immense impact it achieves globally and the way in which it raises visibility for the research we publish. For any institutions considering setting up an open access university press, I'll just also quickly mention the staffing levels and operational infrastructure that we have in place. So we have the equivalent of around 9 FTE working across commissioning, editorial and production, journals, marketing and sales functions, and all of them come from a publishing background. The press is situated in the UCL Library Services structure, and scholarly publishing really adds great value to research outputs, and we see it as a collaborative process in which we work in partnership with academics to achieve the best outcome for their books. Finally, I'm just going to touch briefly on the wider landscape for open access for monographs. It's particularly timely to focus on this as UKRI is currently undertaking its open access review and consultation. And UKRI plans to introduce an open access requirement for books that result from research that acknowledges UKRI funding. And it will also review the requirements for the REF after REF 2021. So I think we're going to continue to see a much greater transition to open access for monographs in the coming years. So thank you. That was a brief introduction to UCL Press, and I'm very happy to take questions later.
Wonderful, thank you, Lara, for that. So we'll just now move on to our next panelist, which will be Victoria Moody. I don't know whether you, okay, so you've got your camera on, that's wonderful. So I should add, some of our speakers won't be delivering slides, they prefer to just give a straight talk. And we will also just compile questions throughout the panelists' presentation, and then I will deliver them to each individual panelist in turn. So I'll hand the keys over to you now, Victoria.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here. It's been such an interesting day. I'm going to speak really briefly. I just wanted to show a few visuals, so I thought it would be good to put things down in a short slideshow. So I'm Interim Research Strategy Lead at JISC, but I also have a substantive role as Deputy Director of the UK Data Service. So as part of that role, we have a function looking at impact. So one of the things we do is we look for examples of really good reproducible examples of data usage in research. This is a PID that represents the International Energy Agency data that we make available to HE, FE for research and teaching, and also to the Houses of Commons and Lords Libraries for their policy work. So this data finds its way into the Landsat Countdown, which some of you might have heard of. It's a 15-year study looking at the climate emergency as it relates to public health. So it's an international 24 institution study that's periodically taking analyses from a load of data sets. So there are about 28 different indicators. And so we see that the IEA data represents in the Landsat Countdown through that PID, that digital object identifier that we make available in the UK Data Service. So another example is the Social Metrics Commission. They've used some data that we make available around poverty to develop up some poverty indicators. So these data includes households below average income, living costs and food survey, understanding society. A step on from the digital object identifier that's made available in many ways, and through research we see it appearing in many different publications, is the code, which is used to analyse the data to create the outputs. So here is the Social Metrics Commission's code. It's openly available. You just have to go onto their website and you can access it. So I've also extracted the DOE file in Starter just to show you the code in its glory. It's one of my favourite images. I know it's a small writing and stuff, but do have a look at it. It's really useful. So you can see how those data have been used to run the analyses, what the fields were and what the outturn was. So in terms of JISC, we're focused on supporting common standards, so growing the corpora of standards to meet requirements for reproducibility. So that includes
Victoria, sorry,
hello?
I'm really sorry. I think you're not actually advancing your slides.
Okay.
Yeah, if you just click on the presenter to present your slides for the slideshow.
I'm sharing. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you just share again, I don't know whether one of the AV team will just want to pop in just to help.
Can you see it now?
So you're sharing your your desktop is being shared. It's just that I don't think you've clicked on the actual like sort of presenter.
If you click down in the bottom right hand corner, the first tab along, that should go into full screen mode.
Yeah, that's what it is. The full screen mode. Can you see that?
No.
Or start, or at the top of your screen on the left hand side, it says start presentation.
Sorry, I can't find it actually. Should I just keep talking?
You can if you want to just use the thumbnails on the left side of your screen just to advance the slides if you can't find the full screen view, so we know what we're talking and what you're referring to.
Sorry, yeah,
That's
sorry
fine,
about
don't
this.
worry, no, it's okay, these things happen.
I should have been available for the run through. I'll just talk through.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, so I know we've not got much time. So yeah, we're looking at supporting common standards. So a transition towards metadata across the piece. So linked identifiers, schemas, graphs, everything is output, ? So we're also interested in intelligent metadata models and collaborative innovation. So expansion of the ecosystem for knowledge exchange, public benefit and added impact. So our research sector strategy has 7 priorities, and these are financial sustainability, expertise, so retention and development of the skills needed by the sector, excellence, integrity and ethics, knowledge exchange, and organisational strategy and culture. So these support reproducibility in many ways. An update on 2019 to 2020, we're doing a lot of work in open access, as you might imagine. We've negotiated large-scale open access agreements with Wiley, increasing open access in Wiley journals to 80% for £2 million less expenditure, and 42% of UK research output is now covered by transformative agreements. So for research analytics, we've done some evidence gathering, looking at technology providers, higher education institutions, and a survey of research managers at UKRIO to understand their preferences for any kind of research analytics models that they don't yet have access to. So they're interested in grant applications as a pilot. So they're looking at cases around grant management that require the definition of rules against which to analyse applications. So that ties in really well with a lot of the discussion today around processes and standards in terms of developing research projects. In terms of active and reproducible research, we've undertaken a review of our equipment.data platform. It's provided a series of recommendations for consultation to identify the next steps for supporting research as it flows through the research estate. So we've got opportunities that we've noted to build on the model in the areas of potential automated approaches to digital asset management with regards to equipment, kit and facilities, and including associated persistent identifiers and related metadata schema. So that's a really exciting proposal that we have for future development of that platform. So we're updating the research repository, the JISC research repository with Core Trust Seal ISO 27001, and being a UK sector needs focused repository with dynamic purchasing solutions, including Elsevier, Mendeley, Data and Figshare platforms. So in terms of reproducibility projects, we're looking at editors for better research as well. We're working to support that project to create a public database of journal editors who commit to valuing and upholding open and reproducible practices when assessing submitted manuscripts. Supporting the coordination of Octopus, which was mentioned earlier today, so how it can make use of JISC services, for example, Core and other repository services. And also the Knowledge Exchange Working Group on Open Scholarship and Research is looking at the concept of an openness profile, which is a portfolio approach for organising and presenting contributions to open scholarships, which can be embedded into an ORCID record. So hugely interesting in terms of reproducibility. So looking to the future, we're looking at analytics, building capacity through technical enablers, rapid innovation and research, integrity, reproducibility and reuse. So this has been really useful today, and accelerating the achievement, delivery and monitoring of the journey to full open access. So I'm going to stop there because there are the visual slides I'll send through that people can look at afterwards. So I'm happy to take questions after the next presentations. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Victoria. Your slides will be put on the OSF, so people can sort of offline sync them up with what you've said. So no problem there. And thank you very much. So now I'm going to hand the floor over to Ben, who's been sort of run ragged with lots of different similar events. So thank you again, Ben, for giving up your time. So I'll let you talk about what the wonderful work Wellcome are doing.
Well, thanks very much, Sam, and it's a real pleasure to come and talk today and share a little bit about what Wellcome's been working on with our Reimagine research initiative. Hopefully many of you have seen this on Twitter and elsewhere, maybe even filled in our very long survey, in which case thank you very much. It's been a very exciting year or so actually for Wellcome in the research culture space, and I think it's fair to say that we have come late to the party in many ways, but I hope that we're making up for that by really meaning it when we've joined in the conversation and trying to certainly advance what Wellcome's doing to improve the situation. So just as a quick overview for those who maybe haven't followed the initiative as closely, we began this last year in September, and there was a kind of article from our director, Jeremy Ferrara, talking about how he saw these warning lights on the dashboard of research, and he spoke about the many wonderful things that he thinks a career in research offers to people, but his sense that there were growing unsustainable practices that he was worried were going to undermine the whole situation. And he upfront acknowledged that Wellcome was behind driving many of those and had a responsibility to rethink how we operated as a funder to make sure that we contributed to a positive culture, including things like reproducibility. We began in the autumn last year an evidence gathering phase. We were very aware that we had lots of anecdotal evidence, but very little in the way of comprehensive analysis to help guide our actions. So that's where we built the survey, which you may have come across. We went out and interviewed over 100 individuals across both academic research and industry, different career stages, different disciplines. The survey itself reached over 4,000 people across the world, which is fantastic and has given us a really rich data set to dig into, particularly because it's big enough that it lets us go beyond just the headline issues as well and dig down into the experience of different groups within research and to understand some of the nuances. So again, thank you to anyone who persevered through 70 questions. And then we've also been going out into the community actually when we're still allowed to do that. We had a series of town hall events across the UK. So these were events gathering around 100 people or so together in a room for an afternoon and using that time to dig through the results from the survey and then also to start to bridge towards what are some of the ideas for change. And we had a whole range of ideas from those events, everything from very small and, you know, don't put grant deadlines after Christmas, otherwise I work all of Christmas, to the very big of, you know, the future of peer review and things like that. So I think it's been really valuable actually going out to the community and recognizing the fact that Wellcome doesn't have any of the answers to these problems, but we do have some levers that we can pull and change, but actually we want the community to help us understand where to begin. We also have run a bigger engagement process through our cafe culture kits. The original sets were these physical boxes which arrived in the post and very much a bit like a town hall process, but played out in almost a board game style. So you had cards that you could work through some of the survey results, begin to think about the challenges that were being reported in the survey, and then some of the ideas and solutions behind those. The idea was that you could get groups of peers together. Obviously, that's a bit more difficult these days. So we've just actually launched a virtual version. And if you are interested in digging into the outcomes of the initiative in a structured way, so that it's not overwhelming, I'd really advise going and having a look at the virtual kit. It's a really nice way to engage with some of the big themes that have come out. And crucially, also, it's structured so that you can share your own ideas. There's an online forum at the end that we're collecting lots of ideas through, and we've had some fantastic outputs from those sessions already. So yeah, please do check it out if you have the chance. So after all that evidence gathering, what did we learn? I think it's fair to say we heard a lot about various different symptoms of a very difficult culture at times. We did hear some positive things as well, but it's fair to say that a lot of the facets that people were really concerned about were around things that really felt that they were eating away at some of the best parts of what a career in research can offer. We had lots about hyper competition, the sense that the system at the moment is encouraging individuals to invest energy in a way that isn't actually as productive as it could be, that there's a lot of emotional and physical energy spent just trying to get through the day at times, and actually that's not a healthy way to be functioning as a system. We heard a lot about quantity being paramount in the system. This doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, I'm sure. And that idea that quality was being sacrificed in the sense that to keep up and to keep pace with that competition, you just had to produce more and more. We heard a lot about the effects of that as well. So this idea that that pressure was stifling things like the creativity, which was actually really valued by funders and by the research endeavour itself. But actually the current system was felt to be pushing that sort of space to think out of the system. And then there was the very personal effects. We heard that, you know, in our survey, around a quarter of those in junior positions said that they'd at some point felt pressured by a supervisor to produce a certain result. And I think those sort of stats really made us wake up and think about the fact that we need to be creating a system where everybody at every level is incentivized to produce good work, to do the right thing. And I think there's many good incentives out there already in the system, but there's certainly things that would encourage people, frankly, to cut corners to try and get the job done faster. We also heard a lot about the very personal impacts of that through bullying, harassment, poor well-being, and some really very difficult stats to read actually about people's personal experiences of working in research, and the fact that that relates back to research integrity in the long run. You know, it's a human-based endeavour. Research is not a kind of abstract concept that happens as separate from all of these things. It's not a machine. It's people going to work every day and doing this, and it was really quite worrying hearing the very personal stories about how people have been experiencing that day-to-day job. So drawing on those symptoms, we spent the last few months really thinking very carefully about what were the causes that sit behind those. And it's interesting seeing so many of them linked by key factors and key levers, as I said, in the system. In terms of Wellcome's role, we certainly see assessment as being a key one. So how do we decide who we give our money to and who gets our grants? I think thinking very carefully about the future of that assessment is going to be key. We also heard a lot about leadership, and that comes in many forms. You know, people are leaders of institutions, they're leaders of departments, and leaders of labs and groups and teams. And actually, at the moment, I don't think that funders, particularly Wellcome, are able to give enough value to the effort that it takes to be a really good leader, and the importance of that in guiding things like good research practice in the long run. You know, we had the mention earlier about how important it is to get those kind of grassroots, those very early stages of someone's research career, getting the right ethos and ethics instilled in people's minds, and for people to see good practice in action and to see the hard decisions that are made to do things the right way. And I think for us, that comes back to making sure that those who are able to show that really good leadership and provide that nurturing environment are valued for it and given the recognition of the effort that it takes to do that. So, you know, with all those causes in mind, where is Wellcome heading next? And I think it's fair to say this is the beginning of a very long road. You know, we've committed to this being a 10-year initiative for Wellcome. I think it's effectively a permanent change of trying to embody research culture practices and build them into every decision we make and every structure that we build. Over the coming months and years, you know, we'll be taking a very close look at how we assess excellence and what that means. How do we decide how to disperse our money? I think, you know, what sort of processes allow us to assess research that's done well. So we talk a lot about the kind of what that research produces, the papers and the outputs, but actually we really care about the how. That's a big change to assessment, and it requires us to think very carefully about who's assessing, how do you do that, how much time does it take, what do you look at as a kind of standard for good. And that's going to be a long process, but one that I think it's important that we get started on. And that will give us a chance to really think about how do you broaden recognition for different types of skills, different contributions, and things like, you know, recognizing the value of a team versus an individual as well. At the moment, the way the system's set up, it really uses the PI as a proxy for the whole research process. And I think it will be there'll be a lot of changes over the years to come if we really want to think about how you value teams and different types of contribution in that team. We also are looking very closely at leadership. Wellcome for a long time has offered, you know, support for leadership courses and all these sorts of things, but I don't think we've ever been able to get across the value that that leadership carries when it's done well. I think there's going to be a lot of work for us to go back and think about how we build that into every bit of the system that Wellcome operates, and make sure that we're really able to identify, promote and support really good leadership, and value the fact that that brings a lot to the culture. And then the last 2 points I think that we're focusing on for action are being consistent. It sounds obvious and sounds easy, but actually I think at the moment there's a real worry that some of the big challenges out there in the system, when Wellcome's tried previously to make changes, we've often focused on one narrow avenue of bringing about change. And for me, there's actually, three broad categories through which you can bring about change. You've got things that you can require, which I think is very important, having, red lines and saying you have to at least meet these criteria. And we've started doing that in things like the bullying and harassment zero tolerance policy that we have. And I think that's vital. But then there's also actually the rewards that you want to put in place for the positive version of what you're trying to stop. So it's really good clarifying what's bad and what's really not allowed, but we should also be incentivizing and rewarding people for doing really great examples of something like leadership or collegiate working. What does it look like when people are able to work together in a really positive way, develop each other and feed into teamwork? And I think you need to have meaningful incentives there that are bedded in throughout the system. And that way, then when you bring out a training course or whatever it is, whatever version of support you think is necessary, you can tailor it to helping people move away from just that adequate barrier that the requirements give you to that excellence and that creativity and unleashing the power of the research community themselves to get towards that reward and really do things better. Because I don't think anyone is disincentivized when there's a competition towards a really positive goal. So I think that for me is about how do we balance those, kind of consistently balance those requires, rewards and supports across how Wellcome works, so that when people come to us, they get a really consistent message about what we believe. And also that you take away that first mover disadvantage in the system, that people feel that by doing this, they will be recognised throughout the Wellcome system, not just in a pocket. And then finally, I think for us, it's going to be about collaboration. And today's been a wonderful example of all the fantastic advocates out there, the networks, the groups. It's been really helpful for Wellcome to come to this discussion, realising how much is already being done out there and how much we can plug into, listen to and learn from. I think it's going to be really important that we try and align and work as one as a sector as much as possible, and that's one of the reasons we've really put the community at the heart of our changes, is because I remember speaking to a person at one of our town halls who sat next to me, and we went through the whole day about talking about what change might look like, and at the end they said, if you can't get other funders and other institutions to buy into this, it's not worth you bothering at all, because all you're going to do is make another hoop for me to jump through, and I'd rather you didn't. And I think that's really stuck with me, that, to get this done properly, it has to be a large scale movement, and thinking about how to carry successes forward from, particularly things around research integrity, where we've got these pools of real success and doing things differently and people embodying that and taking it forward. How do you begin to spread that practice and absorb it into places like Wellcome, so that people do feel that they get a consistent message wherever they go to? So with that, I'll stop. But yeah, as I say, this is our last plug. If you do have a chance to go and check out our cafe culture kits, please do, because they are quite good fun as far as these things go.
Thank you, Ben. They are good fun, and I will keep plugging it as well. And I'll also plug another event that Ben participated in, which I don't know whether Marta Topa or Jade Pickering are in the audience, but they did a great ECR run event that Ben appeared in, which is sort of trying to give a voice to early career researchers and sort of diversity at that level too. So please do look at, I think that's all recorded, and you can visit those. So and also in terms of leadership, I really have to point out Nadia Solomon as well, who I think is in the audience. So please do check out stuff as well. She works for the UKRIO, and of course she gave a talk for the Riots Club last week, so check out her video on that. Anyway, sorry for the plugging in. Thank you again, Ben. So the next speaker that's due to present is James Parry. Are you there, James? Wonderful. Do you want to, can you unmute your camera, or do you want to be muted? Your microphone's muted as well. Can you unmute? Are you there? Oh, there you are. Oh,
I'm here. Can
okay,
you guys
yeah,
hear
oh,
me?
there you are. Okay, let me just mute myself.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, take it away, James. Thank you for coming. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Okay, my name is James Parry and I'm Chief Executive of the UK Research Integrity Office, which is a charity that's been around since 2006. And what we do is we're an independent advisory body on research integrity, or to put it in easier understandable terms, good practice in research. We cover all disciplines of research, from the arts and humanities to health and biomedical sciences, and we provide advice and support to all sections of the research community and also the general public. So our individual researchers, organisations, and members of the public, including research participants and patients. And been doing this for a while, and we've got an interesting perspective because in science we sit outside the system. We don't publish research, we don't do research, we don't fund research. What we do is act as an independent confidential advisory body. And in this brief talk today, I want to talk about some of the lessons we've learned from operating our advisory service for over 10 years now. Let's see if the slides work. Okay, I'm hoping you can see my slides. If you can't, please say so. Okay, so one thing I want to do, following from Ben's excellent talk about the Wellcome Trust work on research culture and incentives, is talk about a report that UKRIO has been involved in that came out today, published by UK Research and Innovation. This was the result of a landscape study into research integrity carried out by VTI, who worked with UKRIO, and also the UK Reproducibility Network, whom you heard from earlier. My Chair Sir Boyd summed this up, I think, in a very good way. So it was an exercise of self-awareness by the research community, like the Wellcome's work in this area, like the Nuffield Council on Bioethics work on research culture back in 2014. We've seen the research community being very eager to engage with these initiatives. But at the same time, along with that self-awareness, which is quite frankly wonderful, the reports themselves can make quite sobering reading. There are 4 reports available on both the VTI and the UKRI websites. I'd urge you to have a look at it after the conference finishes. As you can imagine, echoing studies by the Wellcome and elsewhere, research incentives could be quite a divisive topic. There are those that would generally perceive to be quite positive, some quite negative, and those that sort of sit in the middle. And I was interested in some of there was an interesting quote that popped out towards the beginning of the report, which is, I think the main thing to tackle would be the incentive structure in terms of publishing, funding and promotion. But ultimately the responsibility lies with the people conducting the research. I think that is an important lesson. It's very easy, I feel, to feel we're all captured by the system, that affecting change lies outside of our hands and is only within the power of the great and the good amongst the research community. But actually we can all do things. I think that's very important to remember. And the context of this report, researchers know there's a big relationship, a sort of one-to-one relationship between the quality of their own personal research practices and the integrity of the research that they produce. And the vast majority of researchers are aware of what they have to do to sustain good levels of research ethics, to make sure their research is reliable, there's a good quality and a good ethical standards. But how easy is it for them to achieve that? Now, I said we've been operating an advisory service since 2007. It covers all disciplines of research in all research sectors, not only higher education. We cover how to get it right, as well as what to do if mistakes happen or there are concerns about alleged fraud or misconduct. And during the last, 13 years, 4 key lessons have come up time and time again. The first is that it's very important to be positive. If institutions focus their work on research integrity solely and primarily on the prevention of fraud, or with an attitude that, well, you're all making mistakes, we need to get you to buck your ideas up, that approach tends to disengage most researchers. It also tends to miss the most common or widespread problems. Research misconduct is something that hits the headlines, but study after study, survey after survey shows that the biggest area of concern about the reliability of research is human error, avoidable mistakes, sloppiness, if you want to call it like that, and also questionable research practices which sit between the borders of outright fraud and simple human error. The second issue is one of relevancy. Colleagues describe this as the there is no problem. Researchers can feel that ethics and integrity can be something that they need to consider only at the beginning of a research project, and in extreme cases can be considered something always burdensome. Oh dear, we've got to go through ethical review, and it seems as something to get out of the way before you get on with the real work. There can also be a perception that issues of ethics and integrity might not apply to their discipline the way it applies to other disciplines, or that it's a matter for sort of researchers, PIs, supervisors, leaders to take care of it for them on their behalf. So I think it's very important to speak to the research that the researchers do, find out what their concerns are on the ground and how best you can provide support. And we really need to get people to think about this. The basic standards for research, on the face of it, seem fairly straightforward. Be honest and ethical. Don't just make stuff up. Stealing the work of others is wrong. Don't harm your research participants. Embezzling research funds is generally frowned upon. But so there's this perception that research integrity, good research practice times takes care of itself. But we hear again and again from researchers with some quite fundamentally straightforward queries that they were unsure of, and worse, that they didn't feel they could bring up with their research colleagues. So they didn't feel they could speak out. There was a stigma attached to putting your hand up and saying, I need some help, I'm not sure what I should be doing here. The final point from our advisory service is that this is an issue of culture and leadership. A compliance approach will only take you so far. Education and training will take you a little further, but again, not so far. Culture and leadership within an organisation is key, and not just at the very top, but also from team leaders, from PIs, from PhD supervisors, and getting people at any career stage, from research students upwards, involved in the research culture of an institution. Give them a voice, make sure they have a stake. There are, my personal opinion, is there are 4 key issues that we are beginning to grapple with, but we still need to grapple with. Good research practice is an issue for all researchers. The evolving nature of most forms of research means that it opens up new opportunities for benefits and at the same time for potential harms. So we really need to think about what good research is or isn't, and the capacity to apply ethical reasoning to this is particularly crucial. I think we also need to think about training. Are we teaching researchers what they need to know? Or are we leaving them to pick things up as they go along? And if it's the latter, are they picking up good habits or bad? And providing training and support and education and development activities is a very challenging enterprise for organizations because it takes time. Training that allows discussion, reflection, case studies, and meaningful personal development only really works in small groups led by someone with appropriate expertise. And this is an enormous undertaking when thousands of people may need some form of training and support. There are solutions, but they're very challenging to put into practice. And again, we need to go back to the researchers and find out what is it they need to know. How can we best provide support? How to be relevant? And researchers don't work in a vacuum, as you've heard from Ben, as you'll see from the UKRI report out today. They're affected by the systems and pressures around them, as well as looking at the effects of incentives. I think, echoing Ben, we need to think how to facilitate and reward that good practice. How do we help create and enhance schools, teams, departments where researchers can communicate openly and honestly, where there's equality of participation, where there's no stigma attached to asking for help? How can we find examples of such positive culture and share that good practice to make sure that everybody has a voice? And the final challenge is, I think, the one that requires the most long-term work, because this is again to do with the overall culture within an institution. If researchers are feeling locked into the cycle of publish or perish, how do you give them time and space to do things a bit differently, engage in that reflective practice that we hope to instill? How do we help those whose jobs focus on research integrity and ethics, often the few in number? How do we help those professionals within institutions to focus good research practice and provide all the training? The key would be, again, senior leadership, setting the tone and encouraging others to follow suit. But again, this is long-term work. In closing, I'd like to ask you guys some questions, perhaps prompt some discussion. Research during the pandemic has heightened the existing pressures on the research community as well as everyone globally, and also it's created new pressures and heightened existing ones. How can we respond as researchers and those supporting researchers to those challenges to research integrity during the pandemic? And how do we maintain and evolve the helpful responses that we come up with now in the future after the pandemic recedes. With research culture, how do we improve it? And improve is a very loaded word. What do we think needs to be changed and how? What shouldn't be changed? How do we measure any change to see whether it's been effective? And how do we keep efforts going? Because this is very long-term work. I say, how do we get researchers at all career stages to feel they have a stake in this and a voice in this? How do we encourage more peer-led activity? I'd cite the UK Reproducibility Network and this. I'd cite Sam's Rights Club and this conference today, an example of that peer-led activity, researchers getting together to discuss and affect solutions. And finally, in closing, as the UKRIO is an advisory body, what support could we provide that would help you and your colleagues in achieving, sustaining good research practice and a healthy research culture? Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much, James. Those are really nice, thought-provoking questions at the end, and please keep your questions coming in, and they will be fed to the panelists at the end. Thank you again, James. So if you just take a back seat for now, and we'll bring you back with everybody else. Next up, we have, as a reminder, we have Sam Parsons and Sophia Crüwell. So if you want to come forth, and these two will be known to most of you, but they are co-founders and co-organisers of ReproducibiliTea, and they're going to talk about that now. So I'll hand it over to, I don't know which order you're going to go in, because you share a seat, but there's only one screen. So who's going first? Is it Sophia or Sam?
We're doing it at the same time, but Sam's sharing the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll share mine.
Okay, so if you just share the screen then, and then okay, I'll take back seat now.
How's that for everyone?
Yeah. So if you just want to send that live, yeah, perfect. Okay, take it away, guys.
All right. Okay, so we're introducing the global reproducibility community of journal clubs. Yeah, I'm Sophia Crüwell. I'm a PhD student at the Meta Research Innovation Center in Berlin, and I'm joined by...
I'm Sam Parsons. Hello.
As a basic intro, Reproducibility is an international grassroots journal club initiative. We also have a podcast with the same name, and Sam's going to talk a bit about how we got started with all of this.
Okay, so the history, I guess. So we started a little more than about 2 years ago now, with myself as sort of just into my first postdoc, Amy in her final year, I think, of the DPhil or PhD, and Sophia as a visiting master's student to the department in Oxford. And we had plenty of conversations about what we kind of enjoyed and didn't enjoy about research, and in particular what we think could be improved. And I think that kind of is reflected quite well in today with all of the suggestions that have come up. But I think the problem with being very early career is that you feel quite powerless. There's not much that you can do individually. It kind of feels like you against the system, so to speak. So we got together and I thought, what can we do? What's the minimal thing that we can do that there can't possibly be any resistance to? And it became a journal club, so we could get together, talk about papers. It was great. And then things kind of escalated. And now we have 92 of these journal clubs all over the world, in more continents than not, over 25 different countries, interested in kind of the same issues that we are. And that was quite encouraging. Now this kind of allows us all to talk about the same issues that we've been talking about today, to raise many of the questions that have just been discussed via the platform of a journal club. Recently, we've also moved a lot more online in much the same way as this event has had to, and it's become a really nice way for people to keep up these conversations and to be involved in everything. As Sam mentioned earlier, there was an excellent event held by a wonderful group of people, largely led by the University of Surrey. So Marta and Jade, Ranuk, I'm missing some names, but we'll post those somewhere as well. There's a link to all the slides. It's also recorded, so you can also check out our rival event today. Okay. Now, because of this big expansion, we have had to end up extending. Our core team kind of went from the 3 of us to include Matt Jackery, Katie Drex, and Jade Pickering. And the 3 of them have done just so much work to be able to allow and support the expansion of what at face value is a very simple thing, a journal club, but has also become quite a time sink, quite a powerful thing to keep running. And this, of course, was made possible by support from the UK Reproducibility Network, who really helped us with this expansion. And this isn't to forget everyone that puts in their time into leading the local journal clubs, as well as all of those that take part, because ultimately it's about the taking part. So I've talked a bit about the history, I guess, of reproducibility. So maybe let's talk about what reproducibility is. Now, on face value, it's a journal club. We get together, we talk about issues around open research practices, how things can be improved, how things have gone quite wrong in some places. And that can be very good. Again, at face value, the CV level, it's a good training tool. You get to be involved in these discussions. A benefit of being involved in the discussions in a journal club format is it's kind of away from many of the more critical eyes on kind of open reproducible practices, as well as being amongst people that largely agree that things can be improved. And if there is senior staff present, they tend to be similar to those present today, largely supportive and try to help kind of raise us up rather than point out how we're not conforming to the current standards. But there's a more important aspect to what reproducibility is, and that's what Sophia is going to cover for us. So,
yeah, so kind of the thing where you put in your CV is that's all about, you're learning how to criticize research or whatever. But really, what we think is the main aspect of these journal clubs that's created by these journal clubs is the community, and we won't ever not take an opportunity to make a pun. What do I mean community? So most importantly, community is your local community or virtual currently most of the time, and any extensions of that. So that probably entails being somewhat visible as a proponent of open robust research in your institution, or you might just feel more comfortable talking about these issues with your lab if you know you have a community of like-minded people that you can go back to if there's any issues. Community also means the global reproducibility community, though, and Sam talked a bit earlier about how people are connecting right now. Right, and to let that community speak, we've got a quote from someone who's involved in reproducibility, and I can't see that slide. Sorry, it's a bit slow somehow. Yeah, so it's not only grassroots, it's community building. It's trying to give a home to those that don't have a place to discuss issues in academia and the solutions they want to be a part of. It's showing departments that ECRs want to be a part of a big change, even if there's no university leadership yet. It's one of the few things that gives me hope, because we are the change that is needed in research practice and culture. Sorry. Okay. So I would absolutely agree with that. We are the change that is needed. Or at least a big part of the change that is needed. Early career researchers have the advantage that we are freer than more senior people in many ways, and maybe also a little bit more likely to be idealistic because we're not as stuck in the system yet, maybe. And that does put us in a really, really good position to push for change. And we're also the people who do a lot of the work anyway, and that does give us some power. But Sam and I wanted to take this space to highlight an issue that ECRs might face, which came up a lot at the first International Reproducibility meeting, and that's, will we survive? So I do think that we should use the extra dose of idealism and relative freedom that we have to our advantage to create change. At the same time, I think we all have to ask ourselves, how do we make sure that the ECRs who adopt and push for open and reproducible practices early on in their careers, and that's the very ECRs that we need for this change to happen and for that change to be sustainable, how do we ensure that those ECRs won't be unfairly disadvantaged later on because they're early adopters and advocates for open science reforms. So early career researchers, it's kind of in the name, are at the very beginning of their careers. And that means we are in a particularly vulnerable and precarious position because of that. So if adopting better practices takes extra time, if potentially being very transparently wrong or seemingly messy makes you look worse than someone whose research is closed and therefore neither reusable by outsiders nor sort of accessible by outsiders, then using that idealism and that relative freedom for change comes at a high risk and at a potential cost. And that's a really difficult issue with no clear solution. I hope that building strong communities of early career researchers and open science proponents goes some way to ensuring that ECRs can work towards a better scientific system and have that be an advantage for us. But that can't be everything. It's what we can do as ECRs. It's nice, it's needed, but it's not sufficient. We also need support from the system. And that's including probably some of the people on this panel, sorry. Also definitely everyone supervising PhDs, hiring postdocs, evaluating candidates, all of that stuff. You know what I'm talking about. You need us. ECRs do the majority of the hands-on research work, which is probably also true for the revolution. But we also need your support. And that means we need things like greater support and recognition of the time and expertise that's required for reproducible practices, clearer guidance on alternative career paths, and that's the most important part now, we need more job security for more ECRs in academia. And that's job security that we need anyway if we want this space to be more equal and diverse. Right, so if you're in a position to help us, do that. If you're an ECR and you're looking for a community, get in touch. I think so the next slide, put a little link. We're nice, I promise, and we've got tea and biscuits, so there's nothing to lose. Right.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Sam, Sophia. That was a really lovely summary of your initiative, and it is a remarkable achievement that you've managed to sort of pull it off as early career researchers, given the bandwidth issue that ECRs have in setting time aside that is sort of for extracurricular stuff. So I really can't sort of applaud you enough. So I just want to remind everybody, please do keep your questions coming in. What I will just do is I will read through the questions, and those that have been most voted for, I will direct them to particular individuals around the round table. Of course, feel free to dive in anybody. Obviously, we don't want it to be too ad hoc and uncoordinated. So if you can just let me know whether you want to speak or not. Otherwise, I can just fire them at individuals and then pass them on to other people if necessary, or if the question hasn't been sort of exhaustively answered. I'll start nice and easy. We have one that's highly voted for, and it's for Ben Bleasdale, I believe. So Ben, my question to you is how much influence over leadership and management at research institutions can Wellcome realistically have?
I think it's a good question because, obviously the relationship is indirect. We don't employ the vast majority of the researchers who work with us. We have to partner with institutions. And I think for us, it's about trying to use the different ways we do send signals about what success looks like in the system. So who are we promoting in the bigger sense? Who are we kind of putting forward for the kind of prestigious accolades and things. So I think, Wellcome convenes grant panels. That is a currency in research. It matters who sits on those. I think it's really important that we think about getting people on those who are able to reflect on things like good leadership in research. Obviously, who we're giving the grants away to and asking questions about leadership and thinking about that. But then also working in partnership with institutions. This isn't Wellcome trying to throw its weight around, but the money does speak. And so I think what we need to do is show that we are responsible custodians of that money, that we have a certain set of expectations for where we fund. and work with institutions to make sure that people are supported to deliver those roles and to develop those skills, and be rewarded and be promoted internally. Because I think you're right that, you know, this is something that the institutions hold the reins over, but ultimately we are all in the same business. You know, we are all trying to get research done and get some interesting outputs at the end. So making sure that Wellcome is there as a partner in trying to develop the right skills.
Wonderful. James, I wonder whether you would like to just take up this question as well, because obviously with UKRIO, they're really important for providing sort of training in, you know, identifying sort of limitations and whether they are conducive to best practice. So I wondered whether you could just follow up on Ben's point. Oh, I noticed we've got a sort of lag in the streaming there.
Okay, I mean, I think what in our experience works well is when there is a diversity of different voices. What I loved about this panel discussion is we have representatives of funders, representatives of publishers, and of community-led initiatives, and they're community-led initiatives that aren't done by late middle-aged professors who have a role in this, but often sometimes the only role. And I really admire what all of you are all doing in your own way to help improve things. I think if any one thing becomes dominant, then sometimes good practice can end up being inadvertently straitjacketed. Funders, I think, have a bit of a balancing act in this, in that if they are too forthright on what could be done, institutions can sometimes go, oh, that's what we must do in order to get the money. And so funders need a proactive, and it's good to see they are being proactive, especially in the UK, since the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee made some recommendations in 2018. And it's great to see them embracing research culture, which is long-term challenging work. And I think the funders' voice in that is very important, because with the funding tap means that you're listened to by institutional leaders. But again, it's a balancing act, because what you don't want to do is inadvertently straitjacket research. If funders give too detailed guidance on how research should be done or how researchers should be trained, institutions can think, well, we must align ourselves with those practices, and that becomes the only way of doing things. So I think it's important for everybody to have a voice, and no one voice should dominate too much. Funders are important, publishers are important, so are institutional leaders, but so are researchers on the ground and those who are just beginning in their researcher careers. And I think those voices, those last two categories, are the ones that need to be amplified the most and listened to, because historically they haven't been listened to.
I wondered whether I could just bring back Sam and Sophia on this. But I wonder whether you could incorporate another comment that seems to be gaining sort of votes, which is by Natasha Awaz-Dean. I should actually stress that she is part of the Research Integrity Office at King's and is a wonderful advocate for much of what we've discussed today. And she really is quite a rare and effective individual along with her team. And she says grassroots initiatives are really positive, but I would urge you to work with university structures when they do exist to help support you. And I wonder whether, Sam, Sophia, you could sort of talk about your experience, obviously being at Oxford, where you have a good sort of network of support. What about, how did you sort of enhance that to your gain, and sort of use the leaders that were in place and sort of magnify the effect that you had? And what advice, I guess, would you offer to people you know, who would probably not sure whether to engage in these kind of sort of senior levels of the institution? I don't know whether one of you would take that up or have any other comment to say about that.
Do you want to go first, Sophia? Or
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I mean, I think I can only talk to the beginning of the Oxford one, at least. So after I mean, because we got support from Reproducible Research Oxford, which is an existing structure already. I know that there are grassroots initiatives that are really getting a lot of support from the universities up to even positions in this area. So not reproducibility in particular, but other bits of grassroots initiatives in general. But yeah, I don't know, Sam. What does it look like for you now?
So I think it's an excellent point that James made about that we kind of need representation across all areas in a lot of these initiatives. And I think probably for me, the biggest reason why some of the grassroots initiatives have been so successful is because there hasn't been a university structure in place that kind of could match that interest. So we did receive support from Reproducible Research Oxford, which was amazing. Their focus initially was slightly different to, I guess, the community building aspect that we were specifically trying to do within our department. That's kind of built now into a much broader aspect, especially with kind of that forming the Oxford node, I guess, of the UK Reproducibility Network, which again we partnered with as an existing network to help us do what we were kind of striving to do at the time of spreading this possibility for people to get involved in something that's very low effort, but also allows grassroots initiatives to, in a way, set seed and hopefully kind of set the soil for other positive movements forward.
Yes, I wonder whether Ben. Oh yes, James. Sorry, you have a response to that. Do you want to take over and respond?
Just very quickly, I think you're absolutely right that if you're setting up an initiative that focuses on the needs of ECRs, then the ECR's voices should dominate. I say for people who want to duplicate what, and I'm great you found the way that works for you, for people who want to do what you've done in other institutions, those institutions will have a research integrity officer, and it's probably worth reaching out to them to see if there's support they can offer or other structures within the institution they can put you in touch with. For example, institutions like Glasgow and Cardiff and King's, just saying it now, have networks of research integrity champions and advisors who sit outside the management structure. I think there is scope for collaboration there, and if those lines of communications aren't kept open, there can sometimes be duplication of effort. So I think it's an ECR-led initiative should remain an ECR-led initiative, and I love what you guys have achieved, and I think UKRIO should look at what we can do to support it more. But I think there will be other people working then. An issue, having worked in the research integrity field for long, I like to think, there can be a danger of people sticking in silos. I'm not suggesting at all that's what you've done, but for those who are just starting out in institutions and perhaps feeling isolated when they're trying to set up these initiatives, reach out to your research integrity officer and they may be able to help you or point you towards people who can.
Great, thank you, James. I just want to move the conversation along a little bit to try and cleave our way through some of the questions that are building up. We have a question from Mittal. I'm guessing this is Mittal Mehta, who's the soon-to-be chair of the Research Innovation Committee at King's, and he asks his question to Ben. Ben, you seem to be popular today. I don't know whether you've planted people in the audience, but Mittal asks, thanks for being so clear in that change is a process. I was interested in your comment about teams over individuals. Do you think Wellcome made a mistake in the Investigator Awards, which places a lot of power in the hands of a few individuals who may include great people? What other models are you considering?
Another excellent question, a hard one to answer as well. I think it's fair to say that we've learned a lot from the operation of that scheme, and that as a funder, we certainly have to embrace trying different routes to, support people and understand those experiments, evaluate them and learn from them. I think it's fair to say that we've learned a lot from that particular one, and that we are thinking very carefully about, in the future, how do you support teams? Because it's a lot harder than it sounds when you start digging into the details of, it's a bit like Trigger's broom, like how many bits do you change until it's not the same team anymore and you wouldn't be supporting them. And I think we're thinking very carefully now about what are the different types of support that are required in the system, what are the different sorts of contributions people can make, and to try and make sure that we aren't boxing people into a certain type of career or activity or contribution by the way that the funding stream works. And as I say, that is really difficult to do. You have to experiment, you have to try things and learn from it. You have to capture data from that process, but you also have to be willing to change at the end. And I think that's the hardest bit, because no one likes to be kind of told they're wrong. But yeah, as I say, we are very actively thinking at the moment about how we best further Wellcome's aims with the money that we spend. And I think there's recognition that teams and working in teams is predominating now in how research works. And I don't think always that the way we fund is keeping pace with that and helping foster it in the right way.
I would also probably encourage again, sorry to keep leaning on you, Sam and Sophia, I will bring in Lara and Victoria as well, but at some point I just wanted to go back to you, because obviously there's a sort of a movement or an enthusiasm for these kind of contributorship models, and these can sort of hopefully capture all of the many and varied contributions to a scholarly output. What are your thoughts on that, and could it be something that we could give extra sort of oxygen to make sure that, you know, the little guy, the ECR and other people that probably have to, because of their contract, they can't sort of make a substantive contribution that would necessarily earn authorship, but no less made a significant contribution. I wondered whether you could just pick up on that comment and sort of respond to Ben's response as well.
Yeah, so regarding the contributorship model, so I'm all for that. I do think it can be tricky for early career researchers, because on the one hand, it does enhance sort of the different aspects of the research that's being done that might usually not be that clear. But on the other hand, of course, publications are a major currency, right? And that means publications where you are first author, probably, which is annoying. And so I think, I think it would be great to adopt the contribution model more widely, but that needs to go along with also making sure that that's recognized. That being part of that team is good, and that you did do a lot of work, and that it doesn't matter that you're first author on something. So yeah, I guess it's difficult, as most things are. I don't know, Sam, do you want to?
No, I guess it kind of reiterates one of Sophia's points from our initial talk, that it's more than sort of just writing down who does the work. It's also who recognizes who's done the work. And that's where the power of the PI that's hiring a new postdoc, the evaluation committee for a fellowship, essentially the more senior people can be the supporters of all these changes by supporting and hiring the people that are doing these practices, even if it doesn't amount to a larger number of first author papers.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to bring in Victoria, if I may, because at JISC, obviously, they do a lot of work on research data management and the tools that surround that. And I wonder, does JISC offer services or anything where, you know, the sharing of data, which is sort of viewed as a potential future currency for career progressions? You know, you get a lot more data journals now, and people who link their publications with openly available data are more likely to be cited. So I wondered whether you could sort of comment on JISC's sort of research data management tools, and how they can help with sort of not only just for career progression, but also to help with reproducibility and just sharing data.
Thanks, Sam. And I think in terms of JISC, obviously we're part of the ORCID consortium, and we're looking at how those persistent identifiers can flow through and link into things like data, outputs, all the elements of the research output in the round. So we've got lots of guidance on research data management. We're partners in the UK Data Service that also has a strong focus on research data management. And so, yeah, we do have a real focus on this and the way in which outputs can all link together to join up a career portfolio, as it were. So it's something we're very much focused on, and I can put some links forward for the post conference paperwork if you'd like.
Yes, that would be great. I'm just going to try and shift gears now and try and bring Lara in, who's been sitting patiently. I will attend to some of the other questions that have been asked, but I just want to make sure that everybody has sort of parity, and we have been leaning on the sort of the kind of structural and political side of research. And I just want to ask Lara, which is the UCL Press is something that I know that Lawrence Rajendran at KCL has been particularly fond of the idea for. something like a KCL Press. One of the reasons is because of the huge savings that can be made with you know, not paying these astonishing fees. And Amy Orben is obviously active on Twitter, and she's just tweeted out that MIT, I think, are I don't think they're continuing with the Elsevier agreement. And I just wondered, for you, what is the, do you think that UCL Press and its sort of equivalents will become a kind of a replacement for the current structure, or a kind of a convincing argument to put lead in the pencil of people being a bit more resistant to the pressure of Elsevier publishing and other big publication houses? I don't know whether you would like to sort of comment on that and what the kind of sort of viewpoints on that are.
Well, I think it would, that some of these publishers are so big and have been established for so long and have such huge and specialist infrastructures that I'm not sure it's necessarily the goal of university presses to replace those. And I mean, in our case in particular, one of the key reasons that UCL Press was started was to offer something to arts and humanities and to monographs. So where there is a lot of funding available in STEM in comparison to humanities and social sciences, and a lot of funding going towards APCs, monographs were really lagging behind. And I think that was one of the real reasons for setting up UCL Press, was to ensure that humanities and social sciences were getting an opportunity to publish in open access form with their monographs, even though you know, there is still no mandate, and there certainly wasn't when we started. So I think it just offers an additional route, and one that can, I think university presses, most of them do focus largely on monographs, and I think they can offer that special added value that I mentioned before, that you know, monographs are quite different from publishing journal articles, and they require a lot of development even from the outset of a project. And I think that's where university presses can really add value, working alongside their colleagues to offer that personal approach and support.
Wonderful. We have a question from Andrew Miller, and he asks, what issues could you avoid as a new press that affect older presses?
Yeah, well, this is a good question. And I think when you start from scratch, you're free to rethink everything, really. And one of the things that we were very keen to avoid when we started was we didn't want to end up in you know, that position of publishing things at a very high price, and publishing mainly you know, into in the works that would go into libraries. And obviously open access is the complete reverse of that, but it does need a complete rethinking of the business model, because that is how monographs are published and how they are generally funded. Because the print runs are so low, the price that they're sold at has to go right up. So the things that I think we where we do it differently is recognizing that that publishing the outputs of research is as important as supporting the research itself in the university infrastructure. And if you bring it back into the university, yes, you're paying for it in one way, because it has to be paid for from somewhere, but you're treating it as part of the overall end-to-end research support, and by making it part of the institution, it becomes a real partnership that has a virtuous circle effect.
Thank you. I wondered whether you've caught this recent article in the Times Education. It said that it was Britain's oldest PhD graduate criticises thesis publication rules. And the point is that open access publication of PhD theses were made difficult for studies to be published as books. And it was a 93-year-old Shakespeare scholar. I wondered whether you have sort of caught that before the conference, and whether you've sort of run into issues with that before, where there's a difference with open access and publishing as books your PhD thesis.
Well, speaking for UCL Press, so most theses are available open access now in institutional repositories. That's the case at UCL, and they go into other repositories. But when the PhD is published as a book, it's generally revised quite significantly, and really ends up as a different piece of work with a very different audience. So from a publisher perspective, that's how we would approach it, and therefore the fact that it's available open access and the original thesis is also available, it doesn't present a problem from our perspective. I'm not sure if that was what was being asked, and happy to hear from other research colleagues on that.
Yeah, I can circulate the article because I think it was only published a few days ago. What I just want to trim a few of the top voted questions. So again, the reproducibility peeps. You have a question which is, have senior allies anywhere organised, for example, direct and formal institutional recognition for open or reproducibility champions, in brackets, as well as the long-term changes to promotion, reward, recognition criteria? Does that make sense, that question for you?
I think so. Do you want to go on this, Sophia, or?
No, you start.
I'm not sure about across different organisations or institutions. The Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science has started releasing a few different kinds of awards for initiatives like reproducibility. We had a commendation from them, and some other kind of open reproducibility projects, but they tend to be more focused on projects rather than specific champions, which is also something I quite like because it takes the individual out of it slightly. I know that in my department I had a kind of small award for something or other that was largely self-nominated, and most of it was, hey, I do all this stuff that isn't formally part of my role, i.e. advocate for open science and so on. And I think in some ways being the annoying person in the department that beats the drum can be rewarded sometimes. But I don't think that's like a specific kind of institutional recognition for this kind of thing. I don't know if Sophia knows of any that I don't.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think I know that there are sort of open science grassroots initiatives that have gotten more institutional support in the form of even smaller positions, but I don't think specifically reproducibility. No. So yeah, I mean, sure, please do give the ECR open reproducible champions some more recognition, but yeah, definitely do it as a group, because even if some people are more visible, that doesn't mean that they're doing it themselves.
And this could take lots of forms, I suppose, as well, right? Like it could be in the form of conference awards at posters, it could be in the form of within departments, it could be societies, like it could be anybody in the position to say well done to someone in a kind of more formal way has the opportunity to give this recognition. So it would be cool if you did, I guess.
Yeah, but also change the system, because that would be the most helpful.
Yes. Yeah, it can't be a nominal thing in place of improving the system overall.
Okay, so we have another question here, and this is actually for Ben, but I'm going to use my chair privilege and actually direct it to Victoria, because I'd be interested to know what her thoughts are on this. So the question is, Nature recently published a study where a single neuroimaging data set shared between, I think, 70 teams had a huge heterogeneity in the interpretation, and the kind of message, the take-home message of the paper was kind of advocating for shared workflows. The question is, do you think this should become part of a new normal, and if so, do you believe these should be especially incentivized? I guess if I could just, you can take that question as is, Victoria, or if I may just reformulate it, is there anything that JISC does to facilitate sort of sharing workflows, and have you come across this issue before with obviously more collaborative researchers?
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Ben, for your question. It's a really interesting area. I mean, I think there is a need to use digital tech to open up the entire process. JISC's really interested in that. We're looking at e-notebooks, so research notebooks to open up those processes. I mean, I guess it depends on the research governance structure for the particular project. I would reflect, and I know there's been a lot of talk, and I've seen the Twitter about the current COVID crisis, but there is a Royal Institution Rapid Assistance in Modelling the Pandemic project going on at the moment. I don't know if many of you have seen this, and there is a forum there, and they are literally assessing code, assessing papers, scrutinising them, on peer review on the fly. They're looking at ethics approaches, so it's a hugely interesting project that is just bringing rapidity. And I did see an earlier question about that sometimes there can be a need for rapidity in research to meet societal challenges. So yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I do see digital as changing research. I got my PhD a long time ago, and things have changed so much. I was an early career researcher when things were very traditional. I went out of research and came back in, and I think things are changing for the better. And absolutely, this is, you know, this is a kind of a wave with momentum. I think we're all here to support.
Thank you, Victoria. I hadn't heard of that. I think I'd heard of it at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's great to see that it's sort of building up momentum. Ben, do you want to sort of take up the question directly, since it was sort of directed at you? Do you want me to repeat it, or you?
That's fine. I can go off that. I think, well, firstly, very much agree with Victoria's point about, you know, approaching the problem in a different way than we have in the past, and adopting new techniques and new strategies such as digital to try and embrace the benefits of working together. I mean, I remember back when I was in the lab, which is 10 years ago now, trying to do an e-notebook, and that was swimming against the current then, I can tell you, because it was not popular. But, you know, at least I could see the benefits of trying to do it that way, and it was about trying to sell them to other people. So I think really finding ways to embrace that and give people the flexibility and the resource as well. If, you know, these things don't come for free, and I think doing these things well often does require resource. And then from a funding perspective, more generally, I think, you know, it's a no-brainer these days that that kind of teamwork and finding flexibility is key to getting better results. I don't think there's any downsides to it. I think the challenge for us is, do you incentivize it specifically, or do you create a system that allows it to happen when it's appropriate? And I think that's it's an interesting question, because also the answer probably changes where you are in the process of it being adopted. And I think for us at the moment, we're still trying to take that second one, which is thinking about how you create a system able to offer the support that's required, rather than potentially creating a hoop to jump through where people feel, if I aim for that, it'll be easier to get this money, and that's what's required of me, which again, I don't think is necessarily helpful. So yeah, I mean, I think examples like that are really powerful, because they do show what things are going to increasingly look like, and it's up to funders to make sure we catch up. Otherwise, we're missing out on the best ideas and the best impact.
Victoria, you wanted to come back on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I completely agree with you. And I think the momentum of these things carries them beyond those sorts of incentive needs in some ways. And I think it's a very important opportunity to just seed these opportunities to have the kind of open on the fly research, kind of reproducibility and integrity and ethics discussion. One of the things I note from the forum is that everybody's identified and identifiable. So there's no hidden peer review, which is a different model. So it's just hugely interesting case study.
Okay, I'm just going to try, and this may be a little bit clunky, but I'm going to just try and again give equal weight to Lara. So I have a question here, which is how much as a percentage of the overall UCL research income does the press cost to subsidize?
That's a very good question, and I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but it's really tiny. So compared with the impact reaching over 3 million people around the world, it's felt to be a very worthwhile return on investment to achieve that visibility. And I'm sorry I don't have that figure, but it is a tiny sliver of the pie chart.
Okay, well, thank you for responding to that, Lara. In any case, I'm sure it's not the same amount that Elsevier gets paid for. I'm sure. No. So I can say that I'm sort of toast anyway. So I just want to bring in James, actually, because I first met James a year ago at the Research Integrity Forum when it was the Concordat was being sort of discussed. And one of the interesting things that James said was that when there's a sort of a retraction, or there's a case of sort of misconduct in there, that a paper has to be corrected or retracted, people always go on about the sort of the lead author, but obviously what about the co-authors and their involvement? And I think with an increasingly collaborative research field, these cases of authorship disputes and also the sort of implicating fellow co-authors for certain people's breaches of good conduct sort of echoes what Stuart was talking about this morning. And James, I wonder whether this is an increasing problem, or what are the kind of things that can put into place to avoid these things from happening, and sort of conflict resolution and stuff like that. So I wonder whether you just comment on that kind of broad issue there.
Sure. I mean, authorship disputes are depressingly common. I think they get depressingly bitter and very personal, because authorship matters in a fundamental way. We call the culture of publish or perish for a very valid reason, and within that, you want to be published, and you want to be published as first author. I am envious of those fields where people can publish on their own and sidestep these issues, or when authorship is allocated alphabetically, though there have been cases of people from those disciplines, they've actually changed their names to move further up the alphabetical order. This stuff does happen. But I think with authorship, disagreements can easily turn into bitter disputes, and the correct approach to that is to think about authorship early and often. If we were all doing some collective research project and working together for 6 months to a year, and we didn't discuss authorship until the very end point close to publication, we naturally come up with very different views of who should be first author, who should be second, who should or shouldn't be an author. And if we don't have, and if we only start talking about that and sharing our naturally diverse perspectives at the end, close to publication, we'll have to have a lot of conversations to get through that amicably. If you start the conversations about authorship early on, that is the best solution. But also understand how authorship works in your discipline. In some disciplines, it's quite carefully codified, but the challenge is applying the guidelines, testing the criteria, seeing how they work in practice. In other disciplines, my background's in archaeology, authorship's almost, there aren't guidelines, it's kind of a matter of custom and tradition. You don't learn about it in a kind of formalized way. So I think education and training is very important. I'm going to do a bit of shameless self-promotion here. Yesterday we had a 2-hour webinar on publication ethics. The slides are up on our website. Unfortunately, we didn't record it because we wanted to have a very free and open discussion about difficult topics, but I'd recommend looking at the presentations from our speakers yesterday. They're very good on this. If you have problems with authorship disputes, speak to the research integrity people in your institution. You can also look at the resources on the COPE website, that's publicationethics.org. I'll post the link in the Q&A stream, and we've got some guidance as well. Editors and journals, when authorship disputes are brought to their attention, will normally initially ask the authors to kind of sort it out amongst themselves, and it's a matter for the team to discuss. If they can't resolve things, then perhaps the institution might get involved. But I think early communication about authorship and discussion about authorship is key. No one's saying that I'm not saying on day one of the project you should agree who won't be an author in the order of authorship, but start the conversation. And recognising, of course, that roles and responsibilities will change over the life cycle of a research project, and the end of a research project can look very different from the beginning. But start the conversation early, and also understand what authorship means in your discipline. And at the risk of annoying senior researchers who may be working, junior researchers should not rely on senior researchers having a correct understanding of authorship. This is one of those things that you pick up as you go along, and you can learn things incorrectly. So know how it works in your discipline, know what the guidance is for any journals you're planning to publish in, have that baseline of knowledge. And if you're not convinced that things are being carried out correctly in terms of authorship discussions and agreements, seek help early on, because resolving authorship disputes is very challenging to do on your own.
That's really encouraging to hear, and there's a lot of nods from people around the table as well. I wonder if I could put Ben on the spot here. One thing that people often say with regards sort of, because we do kind of lionize the individual in academia, and this obviously, and on top of the kind of the power imbalance as well, this is one of the causes for the sort of toxicity of research culture, as it's often described. And when I have these discussions, the sort of fire and brimstone person says, well, why can't we just give exemplary punishment to these sort of nasty individuals, so to speak, and just remove their funding, and so therefore it's a sort of a very potent deterrent to people who want to abuse their position. Obviously that's easier said than done, but I know that has been done where people have been sort of real extreme examples of abuses of power. So my question to you, Ben, is like, what can be put into place to really drive home the fact that these people can't, even though they do get all of this money and funding, that they can't just abuse their power?
I mean, I think, as you say, I think it's absolutely right to have clear rules and to act on those when a line is crossed. And Wellcome has retracted grant funding before and taken big sums away, and it's worth reminding ourselves as well that comes with a lot of collateral damage. You know, a person who's at the top of a large lab having their funding retracted and moved away creates an enormous amount of disruption for innocent people below, as you might label them. And I think we're very conscious of the fact that we don't want that to be the way we deal with the problem. You're kind of playing whack-a-mole, and it's not a sustainable way of solving the problem. So I think it is important to have really meaningful disincentives. But I also think that, you know, those who adopt those poor behaviours, bullying, etc., do it because it works, unfortunately, and it helps them succeed at the moment. And until you make a system where those things don't lead to you succeeding, you will never get rid of them. They'll be hidden. People will feel fearful to speak out. There are so many layers in the system that stop you being fully effective at using just a disincentive. I think what you have to do is really mean it when you say that you value the positive version that you're trying to aim for. What do you actually want people to do? What does a really good culture look like? Let's reward that. Let's begin to measure it, understand it. It's going to be difficult. I saw one of the questions in the chat was about how do you measure some of these things? You're right, it's not easy. What I think it requires us to take a very different approach to assessment. I think it can't just be a case of trying to whip through it quickly and deal with large scale things. I think it's about taking more time, making it a more human process. I think we can ask questions about how people organize their team, manage, and those sorts of things. You know, I get asked them when I apply for a job, I'm assessed on it. If I can't describe how I manage people or work with others, I won't get the job. There are ways to begin to build that up. We need to think about what evidence we want people to collect and what stories we want them to be able to share with us. But all of this comes back to, I think, building a more trusting relationship with those we fund. At times in the past, I think it's felt a bit like fire and forget. You know, you hand the money across and see you in 3 years, don't misbehave. And that's it. And I think what we really need to be able to do as a funder is work with both institutions and individuals to say we are all trying to achieve the same goals. We all should abide by a code of conduct that regulates how we do that. We want you to attack the problem in your own way, not limit your, stifle your creativity. But there are expectations and accountability that comes with that role, and the role of being a researcher. So yeah, I think that would be my answer to that, is that we do need to be absolutely clear with people that when a line is crossed, we act, and when it's not just all words. But at the same time, I think we're never going to solve the problem that way until we can really make sure that people know that when they come to seek funding and accolades and whatever success is, that it won't work unless you are living and abiding by a good culture and making your own contribution.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you as well, Sam, for sort of diving into the comments as well and just responding to the people that are in the Q&A. We are approaching the close. I just want to give a few more minutes just to make sure that lots of things are covered. Unfortunately, it's sort of tidbits what we're offering because there's such a compressed time. What I wanted to sort of pick up on is Lara again and Victoria as well, which is sort of this move towards preprints, and I see a lot of positives to moving towards preprints because it sort of offsets the cost to sort of having an internal repository, which obviously costs money and stuff. And I wonder, given not necessarily there's a competition there, but it seems to be a kind of an economical way to distribute your scholarly outputs. And I wondered whether either of you would want to sort of pass comment on preprints, whether they are, we should all just converge to preprints, or whether they sort of have their place alongside university presses.
Shall I take that first, Victoria? Well, I think that the main advantage of preprints is rapidity. So it means that research is available immediately. We launched a new journal, a very broad scope journal on environment and anything related, and that operates with a preprint server and open peer review. So really the key benefit there is that the work can be published straight away, but we still want it to go through peer review to have that that input, but in this model we're undertaking it openly. So I don't think it will replace publication because of that added value of peer review and many other things, but in terms of getting the research out there quickly, it's a real advantage and is the first step and avoids these long waits of sometimes years before things become available.
Victoria, I don't know whether you wanted to add to that.
I mean, I think I absolutely agree with Lara, and I just think I think each serves a role. I think things change. I think Plan S is coming and the UKRIO open access policy, and I think it is a continuum of what works at the time. And I think there's an ecology that all methods can support. We are, I think, where we are, I think, is what I'd say.
Okay, so we are going to close the Q&A now, and we're going to quickly wrap it up. What I perhaps just wanted to finish on maybe is a good way to close, which is sort of a conversation between obviously Ben, James and Sophia and Sam are sort of the sort of different levels of research that are really involved in this conversation about who's ultimately responsible, where does the key exertion of changes lie. And there's one question here, which is, do you think there will be time when PhDs will be allowed / incentivized to work collectively? And I think this is a sort of interesting point, and I see Sophia and Sam have already sort of responded to this. And I wondered whether Ben or James, whether you wanted to sort of respond to the question or respond actually to Sam and Sophia's sort of comments in response to that question. I don't mind who goes first.
Shall I jump in? I think I'm afraid I haven't quite scrolled down to the answers yet, so I may be repeating stuff here. But I think certainly from our perspective, again, you know, we are focused on the outcomes. We want people to be trained well, to enjoy the career as well, and to get the most out of it personally. I think as a funder, that's what we benefit from, is a good training environment. I think the idea of greater cross-working sounds fantastic, and I would like to see the system move in that direction. Again, obviously we are an indirect supporter of these things, so we have to work through the channels we can, but certainly in the latest round of funding PhD cohorts through our system, you know, we were really focused on culture and that idea of kind of working together and learning from each other. So I hope it's going to expand in the future. Now I'm going to read the answers and see whether everybody else thought the same.
James, I don't know whether you want to add.
Sure. Well, very briefly, I mean, I'd echo what Sam and Sophia have said in the Q&A stream, and I think we do need to look at how researchers are developed even from the undergraduate research skills and even from the undergraduate levels onwards. We need to think about accessibility and diversity of participation and equality of participation. I think we need to think how PhDs are trained. I'm always wary of giving any comments on what a good PhD course or method of learning should look like, because I don't actually have one. My highest qualification is a BA on, so I don't I'm very much outside this. But I do think that if different learning modes work for different people, that's an important thing to consider. And also I think Ben's point about what is valued about getting a PhD, there's obviously what the person doing the PhD values, and that's very important. But if the broader system only focuses on certain things in terms of value in the PhD, is that helpful to the person undertaking the PhD? And is that helpful for the quality and ethical standards of the research they produce, and almost the sort of culture they're inculcated with as part of that process, and then go on to continue to work in and also to spread to others?
Ben, can I ask? I just put up like a random grant that people can apply for at Wellcome, and I know what we're looking for. It says we will assess the significance and originality of your proposed research, and then some other stuff. But there's like none of this is about culture or open practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right that we are in the process of trying to change that. So, you know, we don't want to make mistakes. We wanted to make sure we listen to what the community thought first. This is going to be a long-term process, but that's exactly the sort of thing that you will see change in the near future. But we're waiting until we actually know what to put there, rather than putting something that's potentially unhelpful or counterproductive.
All right. And do you think it's going to be something that is going to be a key requirement, or just something that is nice to have?
I think it doesn't work if it's nice to have. It's already nice to have, right? I think it has to be a key requirement. You have to mean it when you assess on it, and you have to balance it, I think, against what people are producing. You know, for me, it's the what and how to make excellent work. You know, it has to be fundamental.
Cool. Thanks.
Could I jump in? We've got a Data Impact Fellows programme, so we give early career researchers, PhD students or first job postdocs £2,000 to spend on impact, to define impact as they see fit and to build it into their research. So it is about challenging that culture and giving them some ownership over how they see their research and interacting with the wider world. It's hugely successful. They've turned into a really great peer group. They peer-to-peer support. So yeah, I think it's just that kind of bit of ownership over some funding at that stage is hugely beneficial.